Okay, we're rolling. Hi, this is Aryeh Cohen-Wade. You're watching Culturally Determined, and it's a very special episode with two guests. They are Drew Spears and Cait Raft, and they are the co-hosts of a podcast called This Podcast is Self-Care. So I'll ask them each to introduce themselves. So Drew, can you go first and introduce yourself?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. My name is Drew Spears. I, as you mentioned, co-host the podcast. And yeah, I'm a writer and comedian based in Los Angeles. And I do a show with my friend Cait.
And Cait, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Cait. I'm friends with Drew, and we do a podcast. And Cait Raft. Cait Raft, is my name. Am I supposed to say anything else?
Yeah, well, you're also a illustrator.
Oh yeah. Hey, I'll give you the spiel. I do art. I also do a Twitch show every morning called Jack AM, and yeah, I have a dog. I live in LA. I'm a Cancer, Capricorn rising.
Yeah. I'm Pisces. Yeah, I'm Pisces. I thought for the longest time I was Aquarius Pisces, but I've recently understood that I am just a Pisces. So pretty big change in my life and how I approach
a lot going on.
Right. And I'll share that I'm an Aquarius, although I don't know any more about my moon rising or, where Mercury was.
You gotta educate yourself.
You gotta understand.
Get woke.
Some star charts during this. So the podcast is self-care. I guess I found out about it because I am a Jesse Farrar fan, and he was your first guest. So he was
nice.
So I don't think I was familiar. I kind of maybe vaguely knew who you guys were, but wasn't a super fan. And then the first episode was really funny with Jesse, and subscribed and have been a listener since, and enjoy the show a lot. And I think it's so it's about self-care. It's a comedy podcast, but it also does have serious stuff in it, or you take self-care kind of with a grain of salt. You make fun of it in some ways, but you also embrace it in other ways. So I think it's interesting. I think it's worth talking about.
Cool.
So can you talk about the origins of the podcast?
Yeah, the podcast originated when I was like, "Oh, Cait, do you want to do a self-care podcast with me?" And she initially said, "No, I'm too busy." What if I do nearly all the work and I just tell you that you show up? And she said, "Okay, fine, we can try it."
I'm exposed.
It's fine. I think I'm exposed. I'm a little pest who can't respect it's people's time.
So the podcast started not as an act of self-care, but as an act of boundary breaking. And
yes.
And I'm glad we did, because it's actually been so amazing. I sometimes my gut reaction is to say no to things. I mean, I can be a negative person. I don't know.
And I think probably latently, I think there's two prongs of this. One is I like hanging out with Cait. I was in a place in my life where there was a lot of transition happening, and I was leaning on Cait a lot. And I was and I also have that problem of I need to to ensure that I stay friends or see people, I need to fold them into my work life. So
I have that too, though. I definitely suffer from if we're going to be friends, what are we working on? And I'm glad we do the podcast because we are friends. We should just hang out without working on something. But if we're going to work on something, why not it be actually taking care of ourselves?
Yes.
And talking about that topic, even if we're ripping on it a little bit, it still ultimately does help me focus more on self-care overall.
Oh, entirely. And I would also say, specifically, working with Cait as a creative person, Cait is an incredibly compelling and engaging performer and personality. She has this really fun way. I've been friends with Cait for years, but even which this doesn't happen that much with people I know in real life. Usually I don't like to consume their art because it's, I don't know, it becomes to a weird thing, especially when your art is just kind of being on podcasts or like being yourself on Cait AM. But Cait has a wonderful way of getting you excited about whatever she's talking about and like letting you feel included in on it, like the joke of whatever she's doing. She's someone where, I don't know, I find myself like very delighted to see where Cait goes with an idea, and then I just kind of get on board and follow it. It is like almost like a weird like parasocial thing where it's like I really enjoy watching and listening to my friend Cait, whether it be on like Jack AM or
oh my God, Drew, stop! You're making me blush. I've always been a big fan of Drew. Like Drew is a star in the LA comedy scene. I'm just like a tiny little baby compared to Drew.
Could not be further from the truth. But I do want to speak a little bit because you mentioned the tone, and I'm glad because I think the tone of the show is confusing for some people because it's like we're not doing character. Yeah, it's good. I'm glad it's a little alienating and strange. It was not on purpose, and it's not on any sort of like. I don't think Cait and I said, so we're going to do characters or anything like that, because I don't feel like I'm playing a character. I feel like I get in a headspace where like I get a little loopier and a little sillier and like go on a little bit more flights of fancy. And, you know, yes, I'll say stuff that I don't 100% believe, you know, deeply. You know, I think we probably are influenced by stuff like Hollywood Handbook in that regard, where yes, a lot of things are tongue in cheek. But also, I don't think I'm being insincere at any point. And I mean, we talk about this on the show. Self-care is such a interesting thing because it is essential and it's something we do. But now it has been co-opted by, you know, these kind of gross capitalist forces where if you Google wellness or self-care, it's $1 billion industry.
Right.
You see stuff about like what's best self-care in the office workplace to make efficiency go up.
Exactly. Yeah, we try to bring like anytime we're being like cheeky or whatever, it's usually at the expense of capitalism. And I think that's fine. Like we're not making fun of self-care. Well, sometimes we are, but usually when we're making fun of what we're talking about, it's because it's like, it deserves it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of fun about it. And we talk about this a lot. Like self-care is this kind of big blanket thing where you can use it to justify, you know, bad behavior, antisocial behavior. I certainly have seen people online, you know, just being like, you know, if someone's toxic in your life, you need to cut them out. And then it's like, well, let's define what being toxic is. Maybe, you know, you're being unfair to someone and don't want to.
Yeah, maybe you have like no compassion.
Yeah. Okay, were you doing the claps, the emoji claps just there? Okay. So,
I know I was doing a visual bit, and this is definitely a podcast.
Well, we are visual as well. But I wanted to ask about, the entry. Okay, so you have a recurring bit at the beginning of every episode. You say, this podcast is self-care. That, you know, the only podcast that is in of itself self-care. All other podcasts are emotional labor, and then you kind of do like a riff making fun of some genre of podcast. So this podcast is emotional labor, and I guess those have become the two contrasting poles of this world. Is like, you know, I think emotional labor originally had this meaning that was like, you know, for like an airline stewardess or something, if she has to be like smiley and friendly all day long, and she's not really being compensated for like the fact that she's faking emotions. And then it kind of moved into like a more general space where it's like, if you ask anything of me at all, like, and are not paying me, like this is emotional labor. Like, you know, there's being kind is emotional labor or something along those lines.
Hey, being kind is emotional labor, and pay me to be kind. That's why I'm always mean, because I'm not getting paid. I think for me, the classic example of emotional labor is like when you have to ask your significant other to do the dishes or something. Like, yes, they're washing the dishes, they're doing the actual labor, but you had to be like stressed about it and asking them to do something, and like, you know, like that. Like household emotional labor is what I always, that's like my classic example.
Yeah. I think the emotional labor thing and how it did start originally in service and was like a literal cost analysis of like, when you're a server at a restaurant, you need to be nice so you get more tips so that you can live. And at some point, emotional labor did kind of cross over into the domestic, most likely because women in domestic partnerships with, I can only speak with cishet men, as experience, sometimes do bear a certain amount of emotional brunt. And, it stems back to, they were expected to keep the house and things like that, and how that's not really treated as a job. And it, and I think in that case, it definitely should be, and you should acknowledge what the actual labor of relationships is. And, if someone is doing work in a relationship, whether that be, I'm just starting to plan a wedding and I'm very in my head about I don't want my partner to be the one who has to do everything. And then I go, sure. And then I think from there, the kind of emotional labor has kind of gotten co-opted online because, online flattens any sort of discussion or discourse so that certain buzzwords, it's emotional labor or gaslighting. And then it's just anything can be that if you stretch the boundaries of it. I see a lot of people being don't ask me questions online. That's, emotional, which is
and there's always and there's so many shades of gray. So Drew's right about things getting flattened, but don't ask questions online, but also that might be unreasonable. But then on the flip side of that is don't ask a marginalized person to necessarily explain to you, you can do your own research. You don't have to ask a trans person to explain to you the history of trans rights or whatever.
Yes. Or I feel I've gotten in fights online with people when the issue of performers with disabilities not getting cast in roles in lieu of performers without disabilities when it comes to playing people who are with disabilities. And that is, definitely labor being let me explain to you why I'm not just being a wilting snowflake, about, Bryan Cranston playing a paraplegic. It's about literally jobs being taken away from me. But I think also at the same time, and Cait's entirely right about that. And, the right does definitely love to engage, debate me type things.
Yeah.
But then taken to the further extreme, you are just being using kind of self-helpy language and, psychological language to just I think, Cait, we've seen this online where people have thrown around the term abuser or that's abusive in totally inappropriate context when it's just
especially people throw abuse around a lot. They throw harassment around a lot. It's these things have definitions, but okay, go off.
Yeah. And so that, I think that's kind of a nod if we're having fun with that.
We love, well, also we just love when people co-opt self-care language to be dicks, and that's our favorite thing. Me and Drew love
really
we actually love that, and we're deeply obsessed. So, as much as we're saying it's bad, if you do that, we have to stand. We stand.
Okay, so one of the running jokes of the show is that basically everything is self-care. So going to the gym is self-care, but also not going to the gym is self-care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's funny because the definition is uncertain, and what if I call it self-care, is it self-care for me or what? So do you have a definition that you thought about going in, about the things you want to talk about?
No.
Could you do an episode on not going to the gym? Would that be interesting enough?
No, and I would go as far as to say, I think one of the reasons why this kind of landed as a topic for a podcast is, on one hand, yes, there is this crazy industry, but also framing it as everything is self-care, and what we're asking people is I think maybe me being lazy and being well, this is a podcast of asking people what they like and what they like to do.
It's vague. We like how vague and broad the self-care topic can be, and all the inner workings and irony that comes with that.
But at the same time, and I think this is mostly applies to our dude guests are often oh wait, I guess I've never thought, do I do self-care?
Yeah.
And then it's interesting, like, being like, oh, well, I never thought about it, but I guess this is my self-care. Or like kind of going on a walk with them and like making them realize that, oh no, the things you do day to day in your life to make you happy. And
it's
like,
nice to force
stressed.
people. It's nice to force people to think about what they do as self-care. And I think just even talking about it, even if it's kind of in a joking way, like makes me at least think like more consciously about what I'm doing to soothe and nurture myself. Like, I think in general, women are more used to having to do that, like just having like more tools for coping and like, you know, just like self-care, I guess. And so like, that's why it's interesting to see what our guy guests come up with. But
yeah, I mean, the concept seems to be mostly coded like female in our understanding. Like, I mean, if you like the prime like self-care like thing, if you said self-care to me maybe a year ago, the thing I would have thought of was Goop.
Yeah, the whole industry is very female. Which is why I love that we do this podcast with like me and Drew. Like, we get the male perspective on it. Like we get guy guests to come in and like, I don't know. It's like, it should not be a feminine thing to take care of yourself. And it's like, it's so rooted in toxic masculinity that even is like what we associate that whole, I mean, you're just not even marketed the stuff that women are marketed. Like when you're a guy, like and half the products aimed at self-care are marketed towards women, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is the half of it.
Sorry, go ahead. No,
I was going to say, there is a half of it where it's like, you know, the commerce size where it's just like, you know, the billion-dollar industry first and foremost got developed around, you know, helping women, convincing women that they have insecurities and that they can fix them. And they're just now starting to get into like, and we can do this for men, you know, men now, you know, and like I use masks and stuff like that, and I use facial grooming stuff, and you know, you see, I mean, even Goop is launching Goop Fellas, which is brutal. And you get like now, like places like there's a, you know, nail salon called Hammer and Nails. And I think that's we really haven't dug in too much on
we
like.
We got to do a Hammer and Nails episode. Yeah.
Just like the dude aesthetic. Yeah. The dude aesthetic of self-care where it's like, you know, it's very much rooted in that like epic bacon guy stuff.
It's very like, it's got a very like, it just screams like no homo to me, like, and it makes me so uncomfortable.
Right, or like it's kind of like tactical gear that you would like use in a counterinsurgency operation or something.
Yeah, they want you to feel like it's like James Bond is handsome and probably washes his face with more than just a washcloth and water. But then the flip side of that coin is, I think, this self-care emotional check-in stuff. You know, men are uniquely bad at. I have a lot of male friends, but I mean, I probably like have like more check-ins and like, hey, how are you doing? And it gets beyond fine a lot quicker with my friends that are women. And it's just like it's harder for men. Men have been, you know, kind of, and I don't think it's ever something that I'm consciously doing it when someone asks me how I'm doing, and it's like, I don't want to get into it, or I haven't fostered a relationship where we get into emotional depth, but it does permeate. Like, it's just like men don't have those conversations about like, how are you feeling? Like, are you doing okay? Like, you know, oh, I feel anxious and scared or sad. You know, they don't really label emotions and share emotions. They usually, we talked about this in the Caroline Calloway episode where Cait was like, you know, did you have a friend who was like a Caroline Calloway, Natalie type thing where it's like, you know, one friend gets all the dumping on. And I was like, no, not really. Cause I think, unfortunately, I just like left that for relationships, you know, getting to the real emotional labor of it where it's just like, oh, if someone was, I had to burden someone with, you know, I feel anxious or depressed or something like that, it was probably going to be a romantic partner, which is awful. It's a bad thing that you have to stop doing.
Yeah. And
you can't let your like, you know, safety net of emotional wellness just be the cat grabbing onto one like line, and that line being your like significant other who's also stressed. You need to actually build, you know, a lot of people that you can check in on and, you know, I mean, starting to check in on other people is the best way of doing that, because, you know, it puts you at a place of service as opposed to being like me. So
I think, like that.
Yeah, I think
like
something
that.
I've really started doing in the last year or so is when I've been feeling bad or in my head, reaching out to others and being like, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I heard you were up for this job. Or, hey, last time we talked. And it gets me out of my head and into a service-minded place.
I like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, you know,
we could all be doing more of that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care, like self is in the name. And so there is like something, it's obviously self-directed. It can become selfish, I suppose, at some point. But also, you know, usually, unless you're like meditating or something, reaching out to another person is a good way to like make you feel better or them feel better or both.
Well, in meditation is such a like funny example, because it's like you can do meditate. I could go walk to a seat and just sit and meditate for 5 minutes, or I can go and spend $20,000 for a week-long retreat, you know, led by a guru. It is so funny how but you know, maybe when you're not raised in a household that like values meditation or things like that, you never realize that, oh, anyone can just meditate. You can just like, learn and read about it.
There's no barrier to entry whatsoever.
But like the wellness community does try to make it like, oh, learn how to do it our way and spend all your money.
You don't have to take a transcendental meditation class.
Yeah. Right. And you did a recent episode with someone who does transcendental meditation, which I didn't really know anything about. So that was educational.
Yeah.
Shout out to Leanne Bowen.
Yeah.
So another thing you do in pretty much every episode is you pick up a crystal and you light some sage. And I'm holding a crystal right now. So I'm not a crystal guy, but I do have this crystal that I often kind of like treat as a worry stone.
Nice.
Recording these things. So here's my crystal. And then can you talk about like the crystals and the sage and whether you feel like you're getting energy from these things, or this is part of the bit, or how do you treat these things?
Okay.
Go off, Cait.
I am a big crystal person and sage person. Not because I think these things hold any like real magical ability. And obviously there's now some controversy with crystals being maybe like irresponsibly mined, you know,
there's a good Guardian article about it that we discussed behind our paywall.
Mm-hmm.
So now I don't know if I can publicly rep crystals anymore. And sage has a whole cultural appropriation element to it from Native Americans. But that stuff aside, I think that taking the time, here's why I like crystals. They're part of the earth. They're rocks. And there's something very grounding about just having like a little bit of nature in your hand, something that came from the earth. And like, whether they have magical abilities or not, each crystal is assigned a different sort of like thing that it's supposed to help you with. Usually it's just like healing or like throat chakra or whatever, like some person somewhere decided that this crystal has this power. So whether you believe that power is real or not, I personally don't believe the power is real. I just think it's nice to think about that thing and it sets your mind in that direction. And it kind of just like poisons your little brain in a positive way.
Yeah. I mean, Cait put it in a more like silly way on our show, and she has art around this, but she says, you know, fake magic is real. And I do think that's an idea that's interesting where, you know, it's like if this crystal is supposed to ground me and help me stay present, I don't actually think I'm getting energy from it, but you know, it's like, oh yeah, if I'm holding it, I'll notice it, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, stay present.
I think it's like you're tricking your brain into focusing on something, because like everything is the world. We're just scatterbrained all the time, and it's nice to like take a moment to be like, I'm gonna look at this fucking rock and think about like, you know, like boundaries or whatever. Sage is the same thing where it's like when I light sage is what you light, and the smoke is supposed to like, I don't know, bring like a cleansingness to the air around you, and like whether that's magic cleansing, like getting demons out, or it's just like let's smell something nice. Like, I think it's nice to light sage because it's a distinct smell. And every time I smell it, I think of like positive, peaceful feelings. So that's another fake magic being real.
So you guys are millennials. I'm an older millennial. I think probably most of the people you interview are millennials. It does seem like there's a connection between millennials and self-care and also millennials and this return to like being interested in tarot, astrology, crystals,
magical thinking in general,
and so forth. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, my guess would be it has something to do with like precarity and poor economic circumstances.
Oh yeah, big time. I think it's also that so many of us don't have any sense of spirituality in our lives. Like most people I know, at least here in LA, like aren't really religious or anything. And like there is something like there's something kind of void in like I'm an atheist, but it's nice to have fake magical things like tarot and stuff in my life because it's like, I don't know, it's soothing. It's like, oh, like our ancestors had religion for a reason. And like, maybe like I'm reaching out for like some sort of spiritual placeholder.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's that, and it really is nice. And the things in my life that feel like religion, I find great solace in it. And I've had to kind of come onto that myself because, I was also not raised religious. And I'm going to crib a little bit from my fiance, Carrie, who works in, kind of fringe science and spirituality. And the studies are out there that like the people who identify as most religious but also superstitious are the most marginalized groups. And it's like the groups with the most economic precarity, with the least amount of social standing of, status and respect. And so there is I think direct between stuff like that, where it's like, well, why do you, whether it's like, do tarot, things like that. I think specifically, as far as the gendered thing where, tarot and crystals, I think are kind of more feminine, I think there was a real uptick in that, post-Trump's election. But I mean, there's also the science and health side of it where it's like, listen, I mean, our friend Natalie came on and talked about coffee enemas, and she explained, why she does coffee enemas and what she believes coffee enemas to do. And my personal belief is that, if she feels well after a coffee enema, that's great. I don't know if all the science bears out, but, we are a generation that has, no real rooting with healthcare, know.
We have the least like access to healthcare that any other generation has had, and we have the least amount of money like as a generation. So yeah, like of course we're gonna be like, into we'll take whatever we can get. Like we'll take tarot.
And like I think the things that don't worry me that much are when people are like, oh, maybe I know people who make like kind of potions or tonics that they take when they have like a stomach ache or things like that. And I think like, if that works, and there are herbs and things like that will calm your stomach. And if it's a self-empowerment thing, that's good. But unfortunately, take it on a long enough,
if you follow any of these roads, it does sometimes lead to being an anti-vaxxer, which like we are not.
But I would hate for anyone to get the impression that I want to do is like poke fun if someone believes that, having a coffee enema will cleanse your liver enzymes, because I'm not really interested in I think that's an interesting thing. And there's obviously something that you can joke about, getting an enema full of coffee, but I'm far more interested on why people believe that than, whether or not it's true.
Yeah. I think there's going to be pseudoscience around there's tons of it in the self-care sphere, but I think as long as it's not hurting yourself or as long as you're not an anti-vaxxer, and then there's this new thing where people are drinking turpentine. I'm not repping that either, but
I haven't even heard of that one.
Oh yeah, there's a whole culture.
Tiffany Haddish mentioned that she will occasionally do a spoonful of turpentine from time to time in her most recent book, and everyone's like, "Oh yikes!" But like, I mean, though that's kind of scary, I mean, I think you do have to look at the cultural roots of that.
Yeah.
We grew up, impoverished, and we did not have a whole lot of autonomy or access
For sure.
health things. And it's like, well, that's why people come to that understanding.
Yeah. And that's, a great point too. Like, we can clown on eating turpentine because you shouldn't eat turpentine, but like, it's like, how did we get there? How did we get to that point? How did we get to the anti-vaxxer movement? Like, it's because we have never had more distrust in the medical system. And like, none of us can afford to go to the doctor. Like, it's like, so of course, like, people are going to be like more and more alienated and isolated from like traditional medicine.
And I think if the turpentine thing or anti-vax thing then goes to the next thing where like someone is, actively making money on, putting people in a precarious, health situation, then yeah, guns out. I want to like clown and shit on that person.
Right. If you're profiting off of that fear, then that's not good. That's not good.
But I mean, we were talking about millennial generation. We interview them so much, and I think there's a reason why, we have so much interest in things like houseplants and, really treating your dog like a pet. And
my dog is a human baby.
Yeah. It's a real thing where it's like, we're probably maybe a lot of us are never going to be in the place to like be able to afford having children, human children, or like, and we're 30 and now we're having these sorts of like caregiving impulses, or like, you may not be able to afford a luxurious home or, furniture or things like that, but like you can buy plants and take care for them and tend them and watch something grow and like get to troubleshoot something like that. And yeah, I think that's a reason why everyone I know now has like 18 house plants and, a tarot deck. And, is considering, getting a stroller for their baby. I mean, dog.
Their dog baby. By the way, Drew, you still have my tarot deck.
Oh, I know. I need to get it back to you.
I desperately need it back.
Okay. I will get it back to you later this week.
I'm publicly shaming you now on a podcast.
It is the best way to get a hold of us. It's like when we're on something, we have to ask really pointed questions to one another because we know that we'll have to like,
I know.
Follow up. Yeah.
It's like how I never text Drew back in a timely fashion. And we recently on our recent episode, like we got into it, and now I feel like I've gotten better.
You have gone better with it. I also because that was the episode that I got proposed to while editing. I was like, I got to give myself what's called in the reality TV sphere, the hero's edit here. So like, I definitely trimmed out like a lot of like small dickish or bitchy things I said, like that I didn't, because I didn't know I was going to be proposed to.
Oh, you deserve it. You deserve it.
Right. So just for people who don't know, you the last episode you guys posted was with your girlfriend Drew, and she proposed to you at the end of the episode, and you said yes. So congratulations on that. And
thank you.
Maybe the first ever podcast live proposal. I never heard one before.
Hey, if it is, someone give us press for that.
Please. Let our relationship turn into clout.
Yes. That's why Carrie did it.
Yeah. I mean,
no, she also loves you deeply.
Loves me deeply. I mean, I'll say this: this is the proposal episode is episode 19, and I mean, if you listen to the first 19 episodes, I go on a journey because Carrie and I were not together. We were separated at the time that I started this podcast, and I think a lot of the things I was hoping to. I think there was a reason why I was looking at self-improvement and self-care and things like that, because I was, recently and suddenly single, even though I still deeply love this person and was making life changes, since I've started this podcast. I now work out 6 times a week. A little bit before I started this podcast, I stopped drinking. And now I actually keep a daily schedule that I make at the end of each night for the next day. But I mean, so
basically Drew has had all this growth and I've stayed exactly the same.
I don't know, Cait. I've seen a lot of growth from you in a lot of the way that you treat your career and balancing the fact that you have a freelance lifestyle with still taking care of yourself and setting boundaries. True. And when you work on certain things. But yeah, I mean, if you
but you've gone through quite a journey, especially like with your love life, and then for it to now culminate in this engagement, I think is such a beautiful. It's been great to watch you guys get back together.
Yeah. So like, listen to the first 3 months of this podcast to see me go from full on crazy person who's like just like unmoored and being like, who's ever gonna love me again, to like slowly getting confidence again, to getting engaged.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride for you.
Yeah,
Drew.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we've had enough Caroline Calloway. Like, let's get a different social media-esque story.
Yeah, this is a narrative podcast about it's a reality show podcast about Jerusalem.
I mean, I don't want to shit too much on Caroline Calloway. We have had some interaction with her. She likes Cait's paintings. She shouted out the episode we did. We do stand. We've decided as a podcast we stand Caroline Calloway. Mostly because we really want to have her on as a guest. We really want to have her on the guest, so I'll let whether in the next week if we have her on as a guest be the like final deciding thing about whether or not I think she's a net positive or net negative. If she comes on the show, she's a net positive. If she doesn't,
exactly.
So drawing a little bit from the previous question, like one thing I've noticed, I guess on Twitter mainly, there's a lot of people on Twitter who are socialists or Marxists. And a significant number of those same people are into a lot of this like more supernatural stuff, like astrology, especially people talking about, it's your, Mercury's in retrograde. We all know what that means, or it's your Saturn return or something. And
right.
there's weird, Marxism, as I understand it, is like the ultimate kind of like materialist philosophy where it's like everything, it's only what exists on this world. There's no God at all. And there's no like forces in history directing things. Whereas astrology is like, it seems like the total opposite of that, of the what time you were born and where exactly is determinative for your life through these occult powers that I don't know, I've never heard exactly why it happens this way. From anyone who believes in astrology, it like just is. So astrology is more popular among millennials. Socialism is more and more popular among millennials. And then you also have the part of wellness that is like Gwyneth Paltrow and the capitalist marketplace,
right.
And in some way like co-opting this idea that was originally from, because I kind of vaguely remember this. I looked on Wikipedia. It was originally one of the first coiners was this black feminist radical named Audre Lorde. If I might be pronouncing that wrong. And she, during like the civil rights era, she said, quote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare." So I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but there's all these different forces, material or perhaps coming from the music of the spheres that are influencing people to go different ways. So in some way, it seems like if you have no power, then embrace it. Embracing astrology, saying like it's all out of my hands. I can't do anything about it. It was when I was born. That's what made me this way, and that's what's controlling everything around me. That's one way. And then if you're a Marxist, you also believe in these like big forces, but it's capital that is
sure.
behind the scenes. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think honestly, like if you the powers that be, i.e., capitalism or whatever, would love for us all to just be working all the time and not taking care of ourselves and not like valuing ourselves and like our free time. Like we are all so overworked in general, especially in America. So yeah, I think like that is like why like self-care is so important. And when it comes to the religious, like the astrology stuff, like I don't know. I know so many like witchy astrology, like communist like chicks. Like I think it's like there's definitely like I guess in traditional Marxism, like it is about like it's anti-religion, but I don't know. There's astrology isn't a religion per se. It's like kind of just like I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's really fascinating, and I want to first and foremost just acknowledge I'm not a well-read guy in theory. I'm my politics really are like dumb guy socialism, where it's just like
Yeah, we're both dumb guy socialists. Me and Drew.
Yeah, and but you've honed in on something that is really interesting, and I mean, though we don't get political explicitly on the podcast, I think that I like to think that the podcast is like somewhat of a we're
definitely like
sugar that if you it's listen long enough, you'll see that we're explicitly
pretty left
and socialist things. I think when it comes to this disempowerment or things like that, and I'm glad you mentioned Audre Lorde, and you're entirely right that self-care, the first time I started seeing it was probably around 2015 or 2014, kind of post things like Ferguson or Standing Rock and things like that. And it was definitely mentioned a lot in activist spaces, and especially post-election, people talking about how this is something that's necessary to show up as activism. Now, I mean, where does the witchy tarot stuff? I mean, I think that there is a direct link between socialism and religion. I mean, some of the most ardent socialists you see online are often, Catholics or people who are deeply religious. I think, socialism is gonna, if it happens in America, it's gonna need a mass movement. And, I think maybe some of this self-care or going into magical thinking is maybe I am powerless, or maybe I can harness power, but you need the community, you need the coalition, you need the mass of people. So maybe admitting that certain things you don't have power to change, but there are certain things that you do have power to change. And
for sure,
even if harnessing, Wicca energy and things like that aren't literal, even though I do believe more and more people I know do literally believe in it, I believe it is just trying to, put agency in spaces where they didn't have one.
It's also about women too, in a big way. Yes, I think astrology, tarot, obviously that whole scene is very anti-patriarchal, and I know a lot of women who are just we do it because it pisses men off, and I like that. I think it's fun. It's fun. It's very feminine. Obviously it's not for women exclusively. It's for everyone. And there's people across the gender spectrum who enjoy tarot and astrology and being a witch, etc. But, I think it's historically been used to, oppress women, just the concept of witchcraft. And I think it's fantastic that it's having this positive renaissance, in our modern culture, where women are being no, or women, non-binary people, men, everyone are being no, we're reclaiming this thing that was very misogynistic, or that misogynist would use to tear down women in the past. This is now something we celebrate and something we enjoy, and it's fun and lighthearted, and it's of the earth, and it's very it's very anti-patriarchal in a way. And what's more capitalist than patriarchy? They're interchangeable sometimes.
Yeah. I do want to tag that, and I don't have enough time to get into this, but I think a lot of witchcraft and magical thinking, as a religious thing that people have grasped onto to get self-empowerment, is kind of weirdly picking up the mantle of things like Satanism and the organized atheist movement that I think unfortunately has gone so far to the right and so far into libertarianism. And I mean, especially organized atheism just being a pipeline sometimes to the alt-right, because it was, places that ultimately they didn't want to, address the fact that marginalized people are most likely to believe in, magical thinking or need, religion. They just wanted a boys club. So I think that sort of self-preservation, and I don't mean this about necessarily the Church of Satan. I happen to know some people involved in that, and they're very cool. But I do think that there's a reason why that and atheism now has kind of a libertarianish bent, and now, Wicca, which is about the earth and nature and everything else, and we're now in this eco-crisis moment, is something that which is oh, I want to harness that and identify with that. And there's covens of witches, which I think kind of does speak to that, like needing community and needing broad-based. And I don't think we're there yet. We do obviously, I mean, if we're talking about a left movement, we need to articulate things like care and wellness and community and spirituality, because otherwise the other side, whether that be capitalism or the right or anything like that, is already hard at work at, using things like self-care and wellness and just injecting it into the workplace, oh yeah, take 5 minutes to do yoga, but I'm going to call you at 9 p.m.
Exactly.
and expect you to pick up the phone.
Right. So this is a similar critique to like this idea of like Silicon Valley mindfulness meditation, and it's just to like optimize your mind to be even better at coding ones and zeros, more efficiently.
Oh yeah. Big time.
Our good friend podcast, Night Call, talks a lot about the Esalen group up in North California that was originally a hippie commune that's now just like, Silicon Valley weirdos. And it's like, our podcast with Molly, I think, where we talk about self-grandparenting, which is her philosophy, is really good because I think we get into well, in a world where everyone wants you to make money for them, sometimes like the most radical thing you can do is just
not make money.
Not make money. Just like, oh, I'm going to fart around and like act like I'm in early retirement because if nothing else, I'll feel good and I won't have done harm to the world around me.
It costs you nothing to be a retiree who enjoys bird watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, so maybe as we get towards the end of this conversation, I did want to talk about one or two of the individual episodes, and that was one of the ones I marked out. So Molly Lambert came on and talked about this idea of self-grandparenting. And was that her original idea? I don't remember this point. The early she coined the term. She coined the term based off of something I tweeted. So I call it a collab. Okay. No, she definitely coined it though. I was like tweeting that, I was eating like a 5 p.m. dinner by myself at Hugo's, which is like this like very grandparently diner in the Valley. And then she tweeted self-grandparenting. And then we kind of got into a whole Twitter thread about like self-grandparenting and there's some article, I think it's on Mashable. Someone covered the self-grandparenting thing and like gets into the origins of like how Molly came up with it. It's a great article.
That episode and also just like that article and it on like Twitter is exactly what I'm talking about like being delighted by like watching like Cait, and Molly's another person with this, just like making things manifest into like reality where it's just like, oh, okay, we're like self-grandparenting is now a trend and a thing that we believe in.
We're doing this now. Molly is so funny.
So defining it is it treating yourself like you are a grandpa or like your grandpa would treat you when you were a kid, or a little bit of both?
It's like kind of both. Like, it's like acting like you are yourself retired and you are a grandparent, because the theory behind it is millennials may not ever get to be grandparents because we're not getting any retirement money. There's no social security that's going to be left for us. And also climate change might make it so we all just like burn to a crisp anyway at that age. So, self-grandparenting is like being a grandparent now. And it's also like doing activities your grandparents would do with you. So like grandparenting yourself. Cause so much of self-care is like kind of parenting, like re-parenting yourself as an adult. Mm-hmm. But self-grandparenting takes it to like a whole even more like low stakes level where you're just like, going to the zoo. I don't know. What do grandparents do? Like,
so much.
Like
doting on a collection of things.
When you're a retired grandparent, there's so much you can do. Like the world is your oyster. Like when we grew up, our grandparents, like they just like, mine like traveled like the country in a Winnebago and like collected spoons. Like it's just
mine
like
were
shit
very
like
chill
that.
Too.
Yeah.
And I think that episode is a great example of like where it's like we're having a lot of fun and like going off on these like really like absurd and silly things, but like there is like a real thing that we're talking about there, which is like that fear of never getting to have grandkids and like the fear that like we're never going to be able to retire, and therefore we're just going to inject that into our lives now.
Yeah, and also so many millennials at least in our circle and me and Drew's life, are just freelancers. So we like have so much of this daytime nothingness, like when we're not working. And it's like, instead of pressuring yourself to be like working on something or like, you know, just like there's like there's a pressure that goes on with stillness in like our culture. And it's like, you can't be still. You have to be working on something. You have to be like trying to make more money. And instead, just looking at that empty, those occasional empty daytime hours as like something you can just be a grandparent during.
Yeah, I used to have deep shame about, like, you know, if I was not working on a gig, then, like, what are you doing during your day to, like, you know, get yourself in position to get your next job? And, like, you know, why aren't you so much more productive? And it's like, why are you talking to yourself like you're the cruelest boss of yourself?
I know. It's so
terrible.
stupid.
And it put me in, like, a awful headspace, and
it's
starting
so
to break out of it is like the most empowering thing, where it's like
there's always a pilot you're not writing. There's always a pilot you're not writing. Why do we even write pilots? They're never going to get aired.
Yeah.
Dear God.
Well, and that's why, God, I love this so much. I love this podcast. I love what Cait and Jack do. It's such a creative thing where it's like also just like taking the reins of your own destiny. And like, I love working on this show. It doesn't feel like work, even when I'm editing like at like 1 a.m. And like, it's a joy, and it's labor that belongs to me that then I get to like share with the world, and it rules.
And Drew does do all the editing because
yeah, I mean, but like, that's a great thing where it's like, I didn't know how to edit before this, and I've taught myself how to edit and like have all these like built-in things in Reaper, and I get a tremendous amount of pride that I can edit a podcast. Like, I didn't know how to do that before.
What you've done with this podcast, Drew, is so incredible, and I love working with you. And like, it's fantastic that like you've taken the lead on everything, and like it's you've done an excellent job. The episode sounds so good, and like, I don't know.
Thank you.
All the fun bits on the show are just like Drew. Like, I'm just going along with them. Like,
see, that's funny because I feel like all the fun bits are you, and like I just am trying to like stay aboard and like have fun.
I think you guys really do have a good, like, you are a good pair. You feed off of each other. Like, you must both have improv training because you kind of do improv style riffs. But yeah, I think your energies in either the mystical or, you know, traditional sense, like, you know, interact in a productive way that, if it was just one person hosting, it wouldn't work as well, I think.
Oh God, if it was just me hosting, the show would be insufferable.
Hey, I would listen.
Oh, thank you.
But then I would also force my way in and become.
That's the thing, is like, we are very good at like weaseling into like stuff we want to do. Yeah.
Okay, so one other episode I wanted to ask about, and I think so Jesse Farrar, he actually was a guest on this show about 2 years ago when he famously when he threatened to hit Hillary supporters with a hammer or something like that. And,
oh yeah,
I had him on during that point, but so his episode was about adult coloring books. So that was like, okay, that seems within this like millennial self-care thing. And then you had the next episode, you had Mike Mitchell, who is one of the co-hosts of Doughboys, and his was Sunday dinner. A nice Sunday dinner was his self-care. And then, so that was interesting because I never, you know, that never struck me as self-care. And you guys talked about like family dinners and things you would like to eat and stuff like that. And yeah, so I think that expanded the range from just like these, you know, things that involved like buying something and then doing an activity or something to like, okay, this, you know, also it's like being with your loved ones and like the ritual of that and memories from childhood and stuff like that. So I don't know if you have anything else to say about that, but that was an interesting episode. And
well,
the Mitch one is one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, the Mitch
like,
one is really fun.
Also, Mitch gets like so vulnerable and like deep, and like it's like a side of Mitch that I feel like most people don't get to see, like that aren't like his close friend. And like he opened up about his dad passing away, and like it's a very sweet episode. And like also Mitch is just fantastic. But
totally,
yeah.
And I think you honed in on something. You know, those were like kind of our pilot episodes. We recorded with Jesse because like we were like, oh, who would we want to record with? And like Jesse was in town, and I was like, oh well, shit, Jesse,
let's get him.
Let's get him. He's a huge podcast get. That's still like one of our like most listened to episodes, and we didn't really know necessarily about the format. So it's like, will you coloring books with us? I think we could definitely have Jesse back on and have him talk about like something that he's really deeply care about.
For that episode, we were like, we don't have time to ask him what he likes to do. We're weird. Picking it for him.
And it's also, I think, just like kind of that, like, I think it came together within like a day. Like, we were like, oh, we should.
We were like, we weren't quite ready to start the podcast yet, but Jesse was in town, so it kind of forced us to like pull.
When you have a chance to get Jesse Ferrari, you got to like,
dump
everything and go for it.
And I would still like to do some like things with like if there's something that we're really interested by, using it and like doing an episode about like a weirder or more esoteric thing. There is one thing that we both have that I don't know if we're going to do, but like I think eventually like that sort of stuff I'd like to live on the Patreon and stuff like that. I would just love more and more excuses to get to work on this thing. So hopefully we might have like another like, oh, hey, we'll just do this weird thing or do a deep dive into this, or
we are going to do coffee enemas at some point.
Yes, that's what I was hinting at. I didn't know if you were chickening out on it.
Oh, my butthole confidence is not there yet, but
okay.
I'm ramping up to it, Drew.
Yeah.
I am scared to put something in my butt. I don't put a lot of things in my butt.
Sure, yeah.
Full disclosure. So it's something I have to gain confidence about. It took me a long time to figure out how to put a tampon in my vagina when I was a kid. So it's like, it's hard to put things where they do want to go. They do want to go. It's natural.
This was not an accusation. I was not trying to call you out. I just was like,
no. I knew I want to get this out into the public. This is a public statement on my butthole. I don't have butthole confidence. Yeah,
but I would like to take.
I'm trying to get there, though. I'm working on it. I have to do. You know what we should do, Drew?
Yeah.
Is I should get some little asshole affirmations going.
Oh, I like that a lot.
That I say to my asshole. That'll be a new segment on the show as I ramp up to my butthole confidence.
We should just announce it for like November, like
exactly.
Just like cornucopia style.
We should set a date like by the end of November. I'll do the enema, but the whole month of November is like asshole affirmations month or something.
Yeah, but like it's like this world is so where like ideas that I don't necessarily think fit as a regular episode that I want it to live like behind the paywall, because it's just like there's so many things you can have
our Patreon's
I've been talking
off.
I wanted to ask about how the Patreon
I want to do
has been going, because I really
good. I mean,
talk about the pay piggies.
We love our pay piggies. I love the whole joke about the Patreon is that it is self-care to give, and you can buy.
I try to mention the Patreon immediately after saying that our show doesn't cost money, and then just mentioning it. I mean, I think it's really cool. I'm very humbled that people already like start doing it. We've been switching it up. Sometimes we do episodes with our guests. Sometimes our guests aren't available. Sometimes it's going to be Kay and I talking about the news. I also kind of want to get into more abstract fields. We also, the most expensive tier, we do a like care package for people, and I like hopefully
what's our goop called? It's called Sprift.
I really want to build a like faux wellness brand as a result of it.
The Patreon is where we just get silly and we have fun, and
we do.
Yeah, it's kind of like more like I don't know. We're not always interviewing people for the Patreon. Sometimes it's just me and Drew fucking around and becoming Visco girls.
Yeah, we have a lot of Visco stuff on it. We're going to do a Visco girl photo shoot. Hopefully the amount we talk about Visco doesn't just like betray how old we are and just make us seem like we're...
Okay, well, so this is not exactly self-care stuff, but since I'm vaguely aware of this and it seems interesting, and I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners have no idea what a Visco girl is, what is a Visco girl?
Kate?
Great. A Visco girl is an enigma. No, I don't know. A Visco girl is like a Gen Z trend where basically like you're an eco-conscious, like cool chick, and you like wear Crocs and baggy jeans and like baggy t-shirts, and your jeans have rips in them, and you love metal straws, and you love to save the turtles and I hope.
Okay, so explain
Hydro
that part.
flask.
Explain the stats.
It's how a Visco girl laughs.
Yes. You can write SK.
Okay.
Also Hydro Flask water bottles, skincare, and
okay, yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of a like anti-fashion trend because you're wearing it's like baggy shirts,
scrunchies, velvet scrunchies. It's kind of just like it's kind of an Instagram aesthetic. It's very aesthetic. All of it is very aesthetic.
It's also like very much a throwback to like, I mean, the look is like from when we were in high school. Just like, oh, like you can wear like a big baggy hoodie and that's now cool girl fashion again. It's like very like comfy chill. So I think there's something that scratches our brains where it's like, oh, now like young cool people are like just like dressing how.
And listen, like Drew and I may be the same age.
Yes.
But I am a Gen Z. I'm Gen Z. So I do get it. I do get it more than you guys will ever.
Totally.
Yeah, I kind of thought it reminded me a little bit of like, like going to the beach on a cold day or maybe like summer camp, like when people would wear summer camp like in 1995 or so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that. Like, okay, so I saw one in the wild recently and I was like, that's a Fisco girl. But
big time.
I think, and one of the things that's really interesting about it is that it seems like they are looking for like, kind of like demarcations of authenticity, like kind of like it's more authentic to dress like natural and have like a ponytail and care about the environment and things like that. But it's rooted in a Instagram filter. So it is this weird like straddle of like social media and technology, but also like, it feels like though they may not have ever articulated like this, like kind of like reaching at a more like naturalistic, authentic life through an aesthetic that doesn't actually exist.
And that's why I love it. That's why Drew and I are Visco girls.
It's very good. Yeah.
I was lying before. Drew's also Gen Z.
I am Gen Z.
Yeah, we're Gen Z.
Visco was like an alternative to Instagram or something. But anyway, we can, okay, enough on Visco. You could do a whole.
It's a filter app. It costs $30 a year. I did pay for it.
On Visco, I suppose. Okay, so I guess let me see. I think those are all the things I wanted to ask. So the show is, this podcast is self-care. Look at iTunes. We'll include a link below. And, do you want to plug anything else or your social feeds?
Yeah. You go first, Drew.
Sure. I'm at Drew Spurs on Twitter, Drew_Spurs on Instagram. That's where I post anything I do. There's a couple of things I'm working on, but nothing that I'm like, oh, check out this at this exact moment. So just follow me there. Follow the podcast. Yeah. If you like it, get on the Patreon.
Yeah. Patreon.com/this podcast is self-care. And then our show Instagram is at this podcast is self-care. And then our show Twitter is at this pod self-care.
Yeah. I guess the only other thing I would say is if you listen to the show, if you like the show, let us know, drop us an email or thing like that. I'm trying to also figure out like I do have stats on like where downloads come from, but like I think we'd eventually like to like do some sort of tour or things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
So like letting us know like where you are and like, what's like, where you would want to go for something like that would be really tight. So if you like it, let us know. Yeah, totally.
And I'm at Cait Raft on everything, and that's CAIT RAFT. And then I also do a Twitch show every morning from 7 to 9 a.m. Pacific time with my husband, Jack Allison. It's twitch.tv/JackAM.
It's the best way of waking up. It really is.
It's the new Folgers.
It really is. I now get why people like the Today Show or like, it kind of scratches that brain where it's like, oh, I wouldn't even say that I love the show. So like this is me just like speaking at it. It is that thing where it's like, oh, it's nice to get up to and like learn about the thing, but also it has this real like hard edge whenever Jack is like feuding with someone, which is also lovely because I love gossip and drama. So it honestly kicks ass when Jack fights with an SNL head writer.
The show gets so messy because I am married to one of the most dramatic posters on Twitter. So I
Rules.
don't think I have any. Oh, I have an art Etsy.
Yeah, Cait's art rules. She does all the art for our show. Cait's maybe my favorite visual artist.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, to be fair, I'm not like.
What about Caroline Calloway?
Oh, okay. If Caroline does a show, then obviously it's Caroline Calloway.
Well, her life is a work of art.
Yes.
Yeah, and she also makes Matisse
Right.
copies.
She said something that rules so much yesterday on her Instagram because she made like a rare group of like 21 pieces of art this week, and she was like, maybe that who knows the next time these pieces will all be together in the MoMA, or just like yeah, all 21, like your 21 copies of the same thing are going to be in MoMA. Give
me the confidence of no, not a white man. Give me the confidence of Caroline Calloway. Get that right into my veins.
Yeah. It is a feminist story in some ways. Okay, so the final plug I want to make for your show is that mostly in my off hours, I listen to comedy podcasts because I don't want to listen to serious podcasts in my off hours. And what I like about yours is that there's just like a kindness and a gentleness to it. You know, a lot of the shows have this very like angry, harsh tone to them, you know, because people are mad about politics, like, you know, Chapo or something. You know, there's a lot of like behind it, and even your Kickstarter sucks with Jesse and Mike. You know, there's some like kind of anger behind all that, but you guys are like, it's just pleasant, it's funny, you know.
Thank you.
Enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we like it. It's the podcast equivalent of easy listening.
Yeah, we try to be little sweeties.
Yeah, I mean, I love mean comedy, and I love I think that's like more my natural mode, and I also love those shows.
Yeah, same. Same, but
I'm recording an episode of Street Fights.
Plug that.
October tonight with Murder Brian and Felix, and it's like, oh yeah, it's been a while since I've had to be like in like that, like, oh, I'm gonna like fucking dunk on a dude mindset. So I'm like, so whoever listens to that,
don't be too gentle, Drew.
Yeah, I'm going to be like, yeah, check out my self-care podcast where I'm a nice person. And I'm going to be like, I fucking hate this shock jock.
There's got to be some crossover between the street fight shock top crowd and, sorry, not shock top, shock jock crowd and this podcast is so.
I think so. I think
you need both. You need both. You need
you wouldn't want, you know, just if it was all pleasant, you would kind of like, you know, float off into the sky or something. When
we eventually get too exhausted of talking about self-care and being nice, like 5 or 6 years down the line, we're going to make a hard pivot into just being real caustic
self-destruction podcast. That's what we're going to do. This podcast is self-destruct.
This podcast will self-destruct.
Honestly, like,
that's a good title for a podcast.
That should be like, oh, Drew, we'll talk. I just had an idea.
No one else does it. It's ours.
We should do like, okay, I'll say it.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Thank you for having us. I've never had to like confront the intricacies of this podcast, and it's nice to like say it out loud.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I was able to provide a forum for, you know, some analysis. Okay,
and now never again. Never again.
Never again. This was
I'm just going to link to this episode.
Why are you
when everyone's like, do you believe that, like toxins will come out of your butthole? I'm going to be like, just listen to this episode. I don't want to speak on, it's just not, it's not fun to like have it over and over again. So I'm glad we've gotten it on a good podcast. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you, Drew. Thank you, Cait. Thank you to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.